The Hilton sale is on. Now through September 29th, you can save up to 20% on stays this fall and beyond. Long weekends, last-minute getaways, holiday gatherings. There's a Hilton stay for all of them. More moments, more experiences, more destinations. Now 20% off for a limited time because it matters where you stay. Don't wait. Book by September 29th and save up to 20% at Hilton.com. Terms apply. Hilton for the stay.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contrast. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this super special episode of the Dr. Psych Mom Show with my friend, Jen Rollin. So this is my friend, Jen Rollin, and she's awesome. And as y'all know, I don't usually have guests. I had one guest 2 years ago, but I like to talk to myself. And it is only because I like Jen so much and she's such an awesome therapist. And also she's a subject matter expert on eating disorders that I am having her here. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So Jen is my friend that I met through networking, right?
Yeah. So basically, I think what happened was my outreach coordinator had reached out to you, and then we were trying to schedule something. And I was like, why don't you just come to my house with my toddler? So it wasn't really a traditional networking meeting, but we had fun.
Yes.
And it's become friends. And she's an amazing therapist, as I'm sure everyone here knows, and awesome couples and sex therapist, and just an awesome friend.
Oh, thank you. And yes, Jen's baby, he was then a baby. He was so cute that I was just obsessed with him. And I have some kind of picture of him, which I'll show you when it comes up on Facebook 1 year later, because that's how I get all my stuff. And I'm sure that'll hit soon. Okay, so Jen is also a subject matter expert in eating disorders, and she runs the Eating Disorder Center, right? That's what you call it, in Rockville. So she's near me physically, although I am all virtual. My practice, Best Life Behavioral Health, is all virtual, but you have in person and virtual, correct?
Yeah, so I run the Eating Disorder Center, and we have an office in Rockville, but then we're also, similar to you, licensed in a variety of states. And we also offer recovery coaching, so we can work with people worldwide, as well as for therapy in a bunch of different states.
Yeah. So you work with people with all eating disorders, and you do coaching and you do therapy, much like my practice, right?
Yeah. We work with people with all kinds of eating disorders: anorexia, bulimia, ARFID, OSFED, orthorexia, compulsive exercise, body image issues, binge eating disorders. So really across the eating disorder spectrum. And then we also work with people who struggle with disordered eating. And most people kind of know that eating disorders don't come alone. So we also work with eating disorders alongside OCD and eating disorders alongside trauma as two of our main subspecialties.
Yeah. So it's never just really eating disorders on their own, kind of like substance use. I feel like it's very rare to have just like that on its own.
Right. So the way I kind of explain it is, if you think about an iceberg, the eating disorder is usually the top layer, like you said, similar to substance use. So behaviors around food and exercise and their body are usually the part that's like peeking out over the surface. But then underneath, the underneath layer is things like trauma, experiences of oppression, attachment issues, which I know is a specialty for you, relational concerns. So in therapy, I think it's really important to address both the underlying issues as well as the part that's peeking out above the iceberg, because I know if you don't address one, that can be really problematic, right? If you don't address what's underlying the eating disorder, it can come out in other ways, right? Like through substance use, through other maladaptive behaviors. But if you don't address the food and body image behaviors, then in my experience, it's really hard for people to actually get better. with the compulsive behaviors they're doing around food and exercise and with those behaviors.
Yeah, so the reason that I thought it would be great to have you on the show, Jen, is not just because I like you, but because a lot of people think that eating disorder behavior kind of just goes away when you are in your 20s max. Like it's like something for like teenage girls, and then it's just done. And so in my practice, I work a lot with couples and with older people, and frequently there are eating disorder issues and body image issues that are at play. And I thought it would be interesting, particularly for you to describe how a partner might notice those. And then also later, how a partner could support somebody with those, because a lot of guys are just shocked when I say something like, well, maybe she doesn't want to go out to eat because she doesn't want to eat. And, and then they're like, well, that can't be right. I mean, she did used to be anorexic, but that was then, this is now. So I'm sure that doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm like, what? Why didn't you ever mention that to me? Like, that's like huge. And, or like sex stuff. There's a lot of body
Yeah.
stuff that goes into not wanting to take off your clothes, not wanting to be touched in a certain place. I have women who don't want the guy to put their hand on a certain part of their body because it's a bad part and it's fat. And the guy has like no idea about this.
Yeah, I see that a lot too in my practice. And definitely if there's further issues around sexuality or like couples work, we refer out for that because that's not our specialty. But totally, I see that all the time with people with eating disorders that they have intimacy issues. Like you said, like they're wanting to put the lights out and their partner is like, why is this an issue for you? And not understanding the depth of like their body image issues and how it's impacting their relationship to other people and their relationship to themselves. And I thought you also made a really important point that people listening, I think, should realize eating disorders don't only affect teenage girls, they impact people of all races, genders, ages. And my practice actually has a blog coming out soon on eating disorders and midlife and talking about the impact of perimenopause and menopause and like that hormonal change and things, body changes, things feeling out of control, and how that can impact women in midlife. So not only do they not just usually go away without treatment if someone had one when they were younger, some people actually develop eating disorders later in life, triggered by, again, like hormonal changes or these big life changes, or even being an empty nester and like kids moving out. So it's important to recognize that like it's still important to get treatment, even if you are not a young person. And that, again, eating disorders impact people of all ages. So just to go into kind of some of the warning signs, because I think this is something that many partners wouldn't even know really what's going on. You might start to notice like a preoccupation with weight loss, with food, with calories, with ingredients of food. You might notice that your partner is like on and off diets all the time and talking about their body. You might see that the person is starting to eliminate whole food groups. They might say, I'm not eating carbohydrates anymore, or I'm not eating fat anymore. You might notice that they start to withdraw socially, and they start to make excuses to avoid meal times or situations involving food. I know that this was something I struggled with my own past eating disorder as a therapist now, but somebody who also has that lived experience, where what I often say is that the eating disorder starts to become the primary relationship and all other relationships start to suffer. So I know in my own eating disorder, I didn't want to go out with people because I didn't want to be around the food that was served. When I did finally go out, I would bring my own food. It was really awkward and uncomfortable. So that would be something that you would notice, is like them making a lot of excuses to avoid eating out, or just having increased anxiety. Like, let's say you're cooking for your partner, they might be hovering over you saying like, what are you putting in the food? And saying like, I don't want to eat that. You might notice food rituals. So excessive condiment use is one, like excessive use of mustard or ketchup or spices, eating foods in a certain order. You might notice that they're eating a very limited number of foods. And then again, that intense concern with body shape and size, and for some, an intense fear of weight gain. And so you might be very confused because your partner is suddenly very anxious about weight gain. And then also like this frequent body checking in the mirror is another thing that we might see, or like pinching parts of themselves or trying on clothes repeatedly. Again, all ways to see if their body has changed, which again, I think could be confusing for a partner because they might see their beautiful, attractive spouse and wonder what's going on, why that person is suddenly so terrified of weight gain or suddenly seeing nothing but flaws in the mirror. But this is truly a mental illness, right? It's not somebody just being vain. It's their brain has been hijacked by a mental illness, combined with the fact that many of them might also be malnourished, which can really mess with your brain, right? When you're not eating enough food, that can cause a lot of some of these symptoms that I'm pointing out as well.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
So it's interesting because a lot of times in my couples, obviously, there's these attachment issues. And so then people are so let's say that the woman with the eating disorder is the avoidant partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's kind of, he's the pursuer, she's the distancer, and now she's not wanting to go out to eat with him, and he just assumes that's because she doesn't like him. Just like usual, she's trying to push away from him, but then he's thinking, well, wait, there's a lot of weird stuff actually going on around food. She does, so it may be a different lens to understand something, but that isn't just based on the relationship. So when you're in an eating disorder, like your focus, what you're saying is you're pretty much focused on that. She's probably not thinking about him much at all.
Right. Yeah. When you're in an eating disorder, typically, like my clients tell me, and I know this is the case for me, like the bulk of their time, like you said, is spent thinking about food and their body. I know when I was struggling, it was my first thought when I woke up and my first thought before I went to bed. And so, yes, I would agree with you. She's probably thinking very little about the relationship because the central focus is like food, her body, fears of weight gain. And again, that's not to say that the person doesn't care about the relationship, but like you said, it's simply a different frame. The same way if someone struggled with substance use, you wouldn't think, again, hopefully you would be able to see it through that frame and recognize it's not that they don't care, it's that the substance has like taken over their primary focus in their life. And so it's kind of similar when it comes to an eating disorder.
Yeah, and also that the partner, I've also seen partners be very rejected, like she doesn't want my food or he doesn't want my food, because I've seen it in men too now as I get older. And I'm working with older men and couples. Like I even see it like in a lot of guys at midlife, they become obsessed with their bodies and their body fat percentage and their muscle percentage, and the wife is like, why will he not eat my food anymore? He used to like my food, and he makes his own food and he food preps, and it's all about the macros. And so would that be kind of related?
Yeah, absolutely. And increasingly, I would say my practice has seen more men and people of all genders. I think, unfortunately, there can be a lot of shame and stigma for men of getting help because it's seen as like, quote unquote, a woman's illness. And so people don't recognize that they have it. But certainly we see that with like younger male athletes, right? Can be a thing, but also just this like Fitspo culture, like you were kind of talking about with the macros and going to the gym. Men can get really fixated on this. And I think it can be confusing for people, or they might make jokes about it and think, oh, he's just like a gym bro, but it's, it's an eating disorder, right? It really takes up all of their time. And again, I can totally see what you're saying, although I don't do couples work, of how rejecting it would feel. Like, I know, again, I come back to my own lived experience, but when I was struggling with an eating disorder many years ago, I remember my boyfriend at the time getting really upset because he'd be like, why don't, like, do you want to try this? Like, when we'd be out to eat, do you want to try my drink? Do you want to try my meal? And I'd be like, no, because in my head, I was super anxious about like having that tiny sip of soda or that tiny bite of food. But I think we would get in arguments about it because it would feel very, like you said, rejecting for him, of like, he couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to try his meal. And he took that as like a rejection of him, versus it really just reflected my own inner world and how incredibly consumed by an eating disorder I was, that I couldn't even allow myself to have an extra bite of food or an extra sip of a drink that wasn't accounted for. But yeah, certainly in midlife, it's like, also if you're cooking at home, I could see that being really rejecting too, or like, why doesn't my partner want to go on date nights with me anymore? But again, you have to see it outside the relational frame and more in the frame of an eating disorder where that has consumed that person's life. And that's really an indicator that they need help, not that they don't care about you. It's that an eating disorder, similar to substance use, hijacks your true sense of self and like your true values, and it replaces those values with an illness. So that person might really value their partner and spending time with them, but the eating disorder has convinced them that avoiding the food at all costs is what's more important.
Yeah. And that thing that you say about not trying the food, that is a very rigid and anxious kind of behavior. And it makes me think like, okay, that's well and good if the person is like open to seeing this as part of an eating disorder, then eventually treatment would have them grow more flexible. And that's why I like your account so much. And obviously I'll have all the links to Jen's stuff in my description of this, but a lot of your stuff is like, oh, here I am eating a donut. And like, I would never have been able to do this when I had an eating disorder. Here I can enjoy my vacation and do all these things. But that's because like you knew that you had it eventually, and then you were in treatment, and then that's what treatment entails. But it begs the question, like, and I know I was going to say, like, how do you support a partner with an eating disorder? But more, even before that, like, how do you bring it up, to your partner? Because some people listening are like, wait, that's what that is? That's been going on for a while, but like, how would I ever say, wait, hold up, is this an eating disorder? It's maybe not just that you don't like pizza or pasta, maybe it's something else.
Yeah. So I know that people can be nervous to bring it up, right? Because they're worried about the person getting upset with them. And to be honest, like initially you might get some defensiveness and you might get somebody being upset. However, usually that's the eating disorder part of them, right? That's scared of being taken away. And so what I typically tell people is to say to your partner, first off, we want to make sure we're pointing out concerns over the behaviors and not weight. So not saying like, something like, oh, you look too thin or you look like you've gained weight, because that's not helpful. But saying something like, I've noticed that you don't want to eat dinner with me anymore. I'm really worried about you. Would you be willing to meet with a therapist just for an evaluation? And if it's not a problem, like they'll tell us that it's not a problem, right? So not coming in accusatory, not saying, I definitely think you have this, right? Because you're not a therapist who can diagnose, but just framing it around the idea of, I'm so worried about you. It would just make me feel better if you went and got this evaluation. And if it's not a problem, it's not a problem, right? They'll tell us that. And framing it as like, I'm really worried about you, pointing out concerns over the behaviors and not about weight. The other thing that's important to recognize is that one hallmark of this illness is that, particularly with anorexia, but it can be with other eating disorders, people often do not realize that they are sick or do not realize the extent to which they're ill. So it's very common for people to think this is not a problem. Again, that's a common feature of the illness. And so you have to recognize that that might be happening for that person. But I know that if my loved one came, my husband came to me and said, look, Jen, I'm really worried about this issue of your life. Would you be willing to see a therapist? If I didn't think it was a problem, I might be a little bit annoyed, but certainly I would hope that I would go because I care enough about my husband and that dynamic. And if he's pointing it out as something that's really worrying him, because I care about him, I would want to go, right? And so that's what we're trying to do, is get that person to realize that like we love and care about them. And not something else that's important to note is we don't want to wait until somebody comes to us and says, you know what, I think I'm sick, or you know what, I think I have a problem. Much like, again, somebody with alcoholism, some of those people might not do that ever, right? They might die waiting to get help. And so we want to, again, try to encourage them to get help before they come to the realization that they need help, because again, just the denial feature of the illness can be really strong and pervasive. And so we want to get them to that specialist as quickly as we can, but we just don't want to wait until they say, like, I definitely have a problem, because that time might never come on their own.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And also for a lot of the couples that I work with, the kids, I think, would be a good motivator too, to say, like, we don't go out as a family anymore, or I notice that they're watching you, like, not come and sit with us or not eat. I mean, do you think that would be a good motivator for parents?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what gets some parents into treatment, right? Is, well, how would you, and again, saying this gently, would you be okay if, like, our son or daughter started doing the things that you're doing, right? And what, like, how do you want to model to your kids? And it's not to say that any of us have to be perfect to be good parents, right? But I think you're right, that can be a feature. And I've heard from clients over the years that motivation of, like, I want to recover so I can eat ice cream with my kids, right? Or I can bake cookies with them, or I can be like a positive role model for them, because some of them, it's like a generational thing, right? Where they may have noticed, and eating disorders can have a genetic component, right? They may have noticed loved ones who were very rigid around food, or who were binging and purging, right? Or doing some of these other behaviors. And they want to try to, like, break that generational cycle. Again, we can't control our genetics, right? But to try to have a more, like, food positive and body positive household. So yeah, I totally agree with you of saying, like, I'm worried how it's going to affect the kids. I think, and I want to be able to go out to dinner as a family and, like, enjoy our vacations together. I think that would be a good motivator too, beyond just that I'm worried and concerned about you as a partner.
And the whole bathing suit thing, like, there's so many women who are like, we're scared to wear a bathing suit, and then they realize they never got in the water with the children, and they missed out on that time when they were little because they didn't want anybody to see their body.
Yeah, when I hear that kind of stuff, it makes me so sad, just thinking about memories that people can't get back and that they missed out on with their kids because of, like, body dysmorphia or body image issues. And so that's part of the work that I do with people in therapy, is trying to help them, like, define the eating disorder values versus their true values. And I use a blend of therapies, but one of them is exposure and response prevention, right? And so working up their hierarchy and hopefully getting to the point where they can wear that bathing suit at the beach with their kids. Because I always say, you know, our kids don't care about the way our stomach looked in the bikini or the way our arm looked, but they care about the fact that you were in the water with them and that they have those pictures and those memories with you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a lot of the stuff that you say is modeling this food positive environment for your kids, and so that food is okay, and we can eat what we want, and that we should be flexible around it. I think the flexibility is the part that is so important when you're parenting. You want to be able to tell the child, like, oh, the world is here, it's fun, it's adventurous. Like, why would we not go somewhere because we don't like the food that's there?
Right. And I think you got at that 100% with this idea. And again, there's such a high co-occurrence of eating disorders and anxiety, or eating disorders and perfectionism. But you kind of hit the nail on the head, mentioning my own past eating disorder and then people struggling with current eating disorders. A big piece of that for many can be this intense level of rigidity that they have. And so what I'm sharing about in my account and in the writing that I do is trying to help people have more flexibility around food, around their body image, because what I believe is that the more rigid you are with food, because I experience this myself and I see it with my clients, your world just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Like, you know, you don't want to go out to eat with people. You don't want to make cookies with your kids. You don't want to, like, have your son's birthday cake, right? And so you miss out, because food is a part of so many of our cultural moments, of our life milestone moments, right? You miss out on so many aspects of your life. And to me, recovery and eventually being recovered is, it opens up your whole world to where I can now go and enjoy vacations, right? And I'm not crying in advance because there's no gym, right? It was just the level of like rigidity that I had and that many of my clients have just serves to keep your world so small. And again, when we think about kids, if you have kids and a partner, it's like wanting to make memories with them and to not model for them like this small, really like sad and tiny life, right? You want them to be able to enjoy their vacations and make friends and, you know, enjoy their birthday cake, right? And not be so rigid, especially if there's someone that's prone to anxiety and perfectionism. And that's not the case for everyone with an eating disorder, but for some folks, those traits can co-occur, right? And so it's extra important, you know, if you have the genetics for an eating disorder, but even if you don't, I mean, I think in our weight loss culture world, right, with all the weight loss medications going around and social media, I think people are even more prone to developing body image issues and eating disorders. So it's extra important that our households, at least, are like, we're modeling positive body image and we're modeling a healthy relationship to food. And even if we're not there, that we're modeling help seeking, right? That if we're struggling, we're going to go to therapy and we're going to work on it.
Yeah. And a lot of people so in general, SSRIs can be useful for anxiety. So do you see that? I know obviously you can't prescribe just like I can't prescribe, but do you see that as helpful as opening up the space and taking the edge off the anxiety so that people can engage better in therapy when they're on like Prozac, Zoloft, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so technically there's really like no medication that's indicated for an eating disorder specifically, but for the co-occurring issues, like we mentioned, for OCD, for anxiety, if there's co-occurring depression, medication can be really helpful for some people. Again, particularly when their anxiety or OCD is really intense and really high, it helps to get them to more of a baseline to where they can do some of the exposures in therapy. Or if they're so depressed, right? We know that there's a high prevalence of mood disorders and eating disorders. And part of that is malnutrition can certainly exacerbate depression, but also depression, as you know, can impact appetite, right? And so when our appetite is really low, it's extra hard to eat. So yeah, managing any like co-occurring depression or other mood disorders or anxiety disorders, like many of my clients take medication for that, and that can be helpful. What I will say though, like just a random thing to point out about medication and eating disorders is when you're in an eating disorder, you can become very scared of everything. And again, that's why your world gets so small. And so I've had many clients over the years who are very terrified to take any kind of medication due to fear of weight gain. And so that's something that we have to work with. But again, that's part of the work overall, is that they're afraid of many things because of weight gain, right? And so we're helping them to be able to try things that are going to help their mental health, even if there is a possibility that their weight could change, right? Because ultimately the goal for many people, if this is part of their illness, is to be less terrified of weight gain to where it's controlling your entire life.
So it really does sound like anxiety slash OCD is like the larger umbrella, and then it manifests, I bet, given on what you learned in your home. So like, for example, a kid who already tends toward anxiety and perfectionism, if their mother's always looking in the mirror saying, oh my God, I'm so fat, then it may manifest more like that. Or, you know, like based on the triggers in the environment, a person who's already anxious and tends toward those, it may come out as like these fears of food and of gaining weight and body issues.
Sure. And there's also, like I mentioned before, a big genetic link, right? Because there's a lot of households where people diet, unfortunately, and not everybody gets an eating disorder. So there really is also that genetic link to it as well. And then, of course, yeah, modeling in the home can impact it. But certainly some people develop eating disorders and their parents never modeled it, right? So there is that genetic link, like you said. There's that tendency towards perfectionism for some people, tendency towards anxiety. And honestly, over my career, the more that I've learned about OCD, the more that I feel that it exists on a spectrum with eating disorders, and that in an eating disorder, the obsessions and compulsions tend to be around food, weight, and body. But in OCD, as you know, it can be around relationships, it can be around contamination, it can be around harm. And so I really see it as on a similar spectrum. And it makes sense then why there's such a high co-occurrence that we see in our practice of folks with OCD and with eating disorders.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's the way that we put stuff into the DSM is just like totally random, and in 20
Yeah.
years it'll be totally different, and it may well be that like it's just, instead of ADHD subtypes, it'll be like OCD subtypes, and one of them will be eating disorders. I mean, it is kind of like that. I think, isn't ARFID like that? Like, isn't that kind of known more as like somewhat of OCD, or do I have that wrong?
I haven't heard that, but I mean, it could be something that people are saying. I think ARFID presents a little bit differently from some of the other eating disorders where there can be like sensory stuff, and there can be a high co-occurrence with ARFID and with other eating disorders of folks being autistic or ADHDers, because many autistic folks might be more selective eaters because of sensory stuff. And some folks also have ARFID, but with ARFID, typically there's and it's important to talk about it because I think people really don't know about this one. And there's a stereotype that it's only children versus there's plenty of adults who have it. But with ARFID, typically there aren't body image issues. There can be for some people, but typically it's more about like either the sensory aspects of the food, concerns of aversive consequences of eating. So fear of choking, fear of vomiting, or a disinterest in eating. And typically people will eat like very small, like numbers of foods that they're eating, but it's less related to a fear of weight gain, which we might see in anorexia, for instance. And it's more related to those other three things that I mentioned. So that's one that really is not talked about a lot, I would say. I think when we think of eating disorders, mostly what's talked about is anorexia. Binge eating disorder wasn't even added to the DSM until 2013, which is wild. So I agree with you. And I think the DSM is like very problematic in many ways, as I'm sure we could agree on that. So I'm interested to see kind of how that changes over time, but I truly think it should be more of like a spectrum in many things versus this like binary, or the way that they categorize diagnoses just doesn't always, I think, make sense. So I think it'll be interesting to see like how
and
that
it's
changes.
exposure therapy that's used for ARFID. So ARFID is what? It's something restricted food intake disorder?
Yeah, avoidant restrictive food intake. But yeah, with ARFID, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and exposure and response prevention are the primary ones that are used.
That's what I've always thought should happen with sex, but like that's that's not like a super.
Are they not using it for sex? Because
They
sex
don't
therapy is not my
really.
lane, but they should
do
be.
to some degree, but I mean, you would have to say that you're like aversive to sex like itself versus saying like you're aversive to the person, which is what most people think. So it's like, like within an unhappy marriage, like women are gonna be like, I want to have sex with him, but they're not gonna be like, actually, I kind of always been grossed out by, like that takes a different level of insight. And also like you have to want to change it versus being okay with it. But certainly everybody that I've worked with that I'm like, if like this is what that whole like starting to massage and all those focus exercises are supposed to get you used to touch. And like I think all of the things that you were saying that I do, like obviously we were trained similarly, that like the behavioral approach of exposure therapy with response prevention, which I talk about all the time for anxiety, seems to be a lot of what you do. And it's a lot of what, I mean, I just think it's the lens through which a lot of these disorders, relational problems, everything can be understood, is the more that you avoid a thing that you're scared of, the more scared you're going to be, the more averse to it you're going to be.
Right. Because as we all know, the avoidance is very reinforcing, right? You get that feeling of relief, and then that, continues with more avoidance. But that's something I love, honestly, about your work, is I feel like it's rare, at least in my experience, to find people who integrate both the behavioral work, but then also will look at like the psychodynamic, like attachment stuff. It seems like people either do one or the other.
Yeah, it really does
like
seem
they,
like
they
that.
either don't look at the underlying issues and they only do exposure therapy, or they only look at the underlying issues. And I think that that is something that's really important, is to be doing both, like to help people in my work understand the origins of their eating disorder and attachment styles and how that could play in, and work through any underlying trauma, but then also do the exposure and response prevention, because you can do all that underlying work, but if you don't address the surface layers, you're never going to be able to go eat the ice cream with your kid, right? So I love that about the work that you do, that you really integrate both.
Thank you. And I love you too.
This will just be a love letter to each other. That could be the spot.
But I mean, I think it's funny too, because you're right. People do tend to take a lane, and it's really not very helpful, because there's people who want to go very deep and understand themselves and their relationship, or like the origin of their eating disorder or their anxiety or whatever. And then, then they're like really surprised when at the end of session, I'm like, so your like assignment is to like hug your partner for like 20 seconds, and they're like, wait, what? Like, I thought we were going to do like a few more years on my relationship with my mother who didn't like to hug. And it's like, no, like we have to work on these things in parallel. Understanding only takes you so far. Then you actually have to get outside your comfort zone and do the thing.
Yes.
And that is an unpopular opinion among the people who want to go deep, and then among the people who do. But the thing is that there is no client that I've ever met, like in a practice where it is the walking wounded who come in. It's not like the, people who have to go inpatient, but nobody doesn't want to understand themselves. Everybody, like when you're in grad school, they're like, I remember my supervisor was like, so at the beginning of every session, you'll take out your whiteboard. And then I went into private practice. I'm like, my whiteboard? Nobody is ever gonna will come back if I have my whiteboard up all the time, so they don't really train us. Did they train you psychodynamically?
No, I mean, frankly, I don't know. I know we did different schools of training, but for me, I felt like where I really learned was in my clinical practicums, like when I was actually working with people and watching people do therapy sessions. I mean, I think we learned maybe about CBT, a little bit about psychodynamic, but all of the eating disorder training that I did was like after school.
That's all my couples training. I never had any couples training, never had any sex training at all. One time somebody came in and said, there was like, what were those things, like case conference or maybe like a speaker or something? They gave us pizza and somebody came in and talked, and she was like, nobody talks about sex issues in relationships. So then I'm like, good point, and then I would like looked into that myself, because they can't train you on everything, but like it was not anything.
Yeah.
Like they train you
No.
not.
It's really unfortunate because, I feel like we learned about a bunch of things that had nothing to do with anything.
Yes.
So, I mean, I do think I had one family therapy class, but I don't practice much family therapy at this point, right? And so I would love to see them integrating more. Like, it'd be great if they had tracks for things that you're interested in, because it felt like everything was just like on my own, after school, having to seek out the trainings, having to pay for them, right? So I think there should be more courses about that. Can you imagine if there was like a sex therapy track in grad school, or like an eating disorder therapy track? Like
that would be
cool.
so great. It's just random based on the interests of the teachers, like whatever the teachers like I know everything about ADHD. It's not my specialty, but it was a specialty of like people at UMD. So like that's why I know about ADHD. And I think it is random. And I also think that that's why it's important that you have a specialized practice, because everybody could treat eating disorders. Whereas if you go to like a regular, just like Joe average therapist, you may bring up eating. So like you said, it would be important for like the partner to say, you should go see a therapist, but it actually has to be an eating disorder therapist. Because if they just see a random ass therapist that's like 2 years out of school and didn't get any training in eating disorders, then your wife will be like, I only eat pink food. And they'll be like, cool, girl, you do you. And then nobody's going to spot the eating disorder.
Yeah, I should have clarified that, because that's one of my big soapboxes. I think because of my lived experience of seeing like a generalist therapist who was like, I went to a CEU and I think you might have an eating disorder, like after a while, of me struggling.
Right.
So that's why you want to see a specialist, because as we just mentioned, you don't get that specialized training in school. And the average layperson therapist, I think, knows very little about eating disorders and actually can unfortunately create more harm or make triggering comments or totally miss an eating
Well,
disorder.
yeah, especially in the context of like everybody is supposed to just do whatever they want. So like if somebody says, "Well, I don't feel comfortable eating a sandwich," then okay, cool. And then like why? Like nobody says like why don't you feel comfortable? If like you say I don't feel comfortable, it's like the trump card. So there's always people that say, "Well, I don't feel comfortable going out to eat because I don't eat past like 6 o'clock," and the husband's supposed to be like, "Oh, sounds good to me." But that isn't real. You're supposed to be able to eat at other times sometimes. And a lay therapist who doesn't focus on eating disorders would be like, well, like Jane doesn't like to eat after
Respect her
6:30.
boundaries or something.
Respect
Yeah.
her. Yes, boundary stuff, man. Man, do I have a lot on that. My episode, The Cult of Boundaries and Preferences. Like that is what it would turn into. And for a lot of people, it is far beyond that. And people do it with their kids too, without even noticing. So they're like, oh, well, like little Matilda here, like doesn't like anything wet. So now we only have crackers for dinner, and that makes me a good mom. And like, what is happening?
Right.
So people do like they're I mean, this is of course my soapbox is that people like over focus on the kids' preferences and don't maybe see the bigger picture of like you have to be flexible, you have to fit into the world, you have to be able to find something to eat everywhere. Like
Right. Or just like in a
right,
non-pressured way, like introducing foods, right, to your child. Like, again, we don't
sure.
think it's helpful in my practice to say, like, you have to eat this, right? Because we see so many clients who are not in a good spot because they're part of like the clean plate club, right? Or being told they always have to eat
Right.
everything, or setting up, you have to eat your vegetables before you get dessert. All of that is unhelpful. But in a non-pressured way, just being like, okay, I have this food out, or I'm putting a little bit on your plate, you can have it or not have it. That helps a child to like explore different types of foods versus catering to the every preference, right? And not even offering.
Yeah.
I think the offering can be important. But yeah, I would love to hear your episode on boundaries. I'm sure as a couples therapist, you hear a lot
Excellent.
about that.
Well, I think and it goes against some of the conventional, like, oh, as soon as somebody has a boundary, it's like game over, trump card, like, that person wins. And I think that perpetuates a lot of self-centeredness in relationships, in various ways. And it's interesting because, like, from my perspective, as you know, because I've been to your house, like I'm an ethical vegan and like my family is as well. But when the kids go out of the house and they go, if a friend has cake, then they'll have cake, or even if it's not, or what have you.
No, I
And
like that because it shows like some flexibility, right?
yeah, and I'll eat anywhere because, as I've said to my kids, because like you can get a salad, you could get bread, you could get the pasta, you could get like you could always find something.
Yeah.
And it's weird because like they'll end up being like more flexible. I mean, this is me, so like they were always supposed to eat everything. So, but like, but eventually, you know this story. But if anybody doesn't, my middle child Clara, she was like, "What about the animals?" One day when she was like 7, and I was like, don't tell me about the animals. We eat meat 3 times a day. I don't want to deal with this right now. And then I was like, well, that's not very progressive of me. That's not very a bad thing. I guess I'll just have to research the animals. Then I researched the animal. I'm a highly sensitive person. So now we don't eat animals. So the point is that, and she feels very validated because, she had a say in her life. But
Mhm.
point being that even like we do not eat food, it's like somebody being kosher, or
Right.
like, so, somebody not eating for religious reasons. You still can't be scared of it, and you still
Right.
have to go and find something somewhere, and you can't make as I say to my children, you can't make problems for people, like eat
Yeah.
something somewhere, do something.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring this up because that's actually something we sometimes tease out in eating disorder treatment. Some people's eating disorders will be masked by like, oh, it's just like an ethical reason or a
Right.
preference. However, there are some people where it's a true ethical reason, right? They grew up eating vegetarian, and provided they can get their nutritional needs met that way, like obviously we respect that preference, for ethical reasons, but it's just helping people to look at their relationship with food and like, is it a true ethical concern, or is it more because of a fear of weight gain? And if it's because of a fear of weight gain, we want to challenge it. But if it's a true ethical concern, okay, we'll work around that, right? And there are some awesome dietitians that we partner with who, can
Mhm.
work with people of all different, all different eating styles. So, I think it's important to say there's like a yes and there, right? Of like, of course, we respect people where it's a true ethical, decision. However, we want to help people to tease out, is it truly ethical, or is there part of you that's like doing it primarily because you're afraid of weight gain, in which case we'd want to challenge it. But I love, like, whatever the reason, the flexibility, right? Of being able to be like, okay, if I can't access this, right? Again, unless it's like you have an allergy, that would be a situation where, a severe allergy, that's a different situation. But I love that, like with your kids, you're like, okay, if you go to someone's house, like you eat what you can find to eat, like there's flexibility.
Be polite, take something, somebody makes you something, be a nice person, the same as you would for anything else. And it's interesting because now a lot more of my clients are trying to not drink, which I support because great, and and it obviously impacts your mood a lot. It's a depressant and it leads to a lot of fighting, man. Like every time, like if you ever do end up working with couples, every time somebody has a crazy fight, at this point, I'm just like, with somebody drinking, and guess what? More times than not, they are. So then like people will stop drinking, but then they're like, well, I don't want to go to like, I don't want to go out basically because I don't drink. And I'm like, you have a mocktail. And then she'll be like, I don't want to waste the calories on a mocktail. Then I'm like, well, some other weird shit's going on.
And like, that's a flag, right?
That's a flag. Yeah, that's the flag. Or like, like we eat the vegan ice cream, but we'll still eat the vegan ice cream. So we could go eat ice cream, and if there's, then we, but if you won't eat the ice cream at all, then you eliminate the eating the ice cream from the thing that you can do. And I used to be a lot more rigid, like in college and stuff. And I would only eat the Tasty Delight that was 15 calories an ounce or whatever. And being vegan now, I eat more types of ice cream than like I used to allow myself when I was very worried, about gaining weight,
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think with food behaviors, it's always what's the underlying motivation, right? Because, I talk about this with clients, but if someone's ordering a salad, why are they ordering the salad? If they are ordering the salad because it looks good and it sounds good, like, great, that's a healthy option. However, if they're ordering a salad because they're afraid of weight gain and they really want the steak, but they're terrified to eat it for non-ethical reasons, then that's not the healthy choice for them.
I guess it's like fear is what you're saying, is like predominantly like, if you are doing any, and I talk to people about this all the time, if you're making your life choices in accordance with your values, cool. If you're doing it because you're terrified, because you feel like a jolt of cortisol when you picture eating the steak, because it has so many calories, and then that is very, as you said, it makes your life constricted, and that's an anxiety issue.
Totally, exactly.
Or
and
like with exercise, like that's a really hard one because everybody approves of that socially. Like if you are like, oh, this morning I went to Orange Theory I did Orange Theory once, it was horrible, for like 90 minutes, everybody's gonna be like, oh, you go, like, oh, that's so good. And meanwhile, like this poor woman is like, basically handcuffing herself to the bike at Orange Theory because she's terrified not to go to Orange Theory. And every time she goes and travels, the place got to have an Orange Theory in the city. That is not living in accordance with your value of being a healthy person. That's out of terror of missing Orange Theory, which has become the obsession.
100%. Yeah. And that's what I mentioned, because I used to have a big struggle with compulsive exercise in my eating disorder, but it would be to the point where, if we were going away for a weekend, I'd be crying because there was no gym there, right? It was like a compulsion. And so that's not healthy. But like you said, exercise is so hailed by society as like, oh, it's a healthy behavior. I kind of imagine it like for somebody with contamination OCD, maybe around the time of COVID, where everyone was like, wash your hands, wear a mask, right? It's very socially encouraged. I think it's the same thing with exercise. And that's why so many people don't realize they have a problem, because all their friends are like, oh my gosh, you're going to the gym, or like you're eating so quote unquote healthy. That's amazing. But they don't know that there's like this internal voice in their head that's yelling at them, and they're terrified to not follow it. Right. And like we can all say, like you mentioned, that raises cortisol and that's not healthy. So it's looking at motivation, but it's also helping people to reframe like what actually is healthy. And health is really context and person dependent, right? So it's helping them to reframe that based on their values for themselves. And it's also helping to reframe this idea of calories, right? Like, what is a calorie? It's a unit of energy that gives us energy to like do things and live our life and hug our kids. But people become so afraid of it because of like diet culture messaging, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of unlearning, I think, that has to happen for people overall. But you're right on with the idea that it's a compulsion, and it's different to be like, oh, I'm excited to go to my bar class today. It's fun, versus I'm terrified if I don't go to my bar class, my body's going to change. It's a very different motivation.
Yeah. And I think that it is also for women, like it masks, because then you're going to see your friends at Orange Theory. All your friends at Orange Theory have the same obsession as you. So it becomes like an echo chamber. And then we joke around about how we're obsessed and addicted to Orange Theory. And then it's like whenever anybody doesn't act like that, that seems like the lazy person. And then like anything, like there's these just complete echo chambers that, you know, you'll only associate with people who have similar sorts of thoughts when you're really trapped in an eating disorder.
Right. And then that becomes so normalized that you don't realize it's like a severe mental illness because you're surrounded by other people who may also have the same mental illness.
It's like the binge drinking. It's like what I always tell people about how like 10% of college kids are binge drinkers, but when you ask them, they say 90% of kids are binge drinkers because they only see the binge drinkers.
That's really
college counseling center, and I would say to them that, and they'd be shocked. They'd be like, no, it's everybody. And it's the people that I work with now, because, you know, the substance abuse is very similar. And if you only associate with people who drink, then you think everybody drinks.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And like you said, I think for some people, abstaining is like the healthier choice, and like getting a mocktail. If again, they're doing it because I've worked with clients who are terrified to gain weight from drinking. So that's, you know, a challenge for them. But for other people, they're misusing it. It makes them depressed, right? And they have a problem with substance use. And for them, not drinking might be the healthier choice. So we can't say any one thing is like healthy or unhealthy, because it's totally based on the person and the situation and their motivation, right?
Well, I will tell you that from my couple's experience, if you are borderline with a narcissist and y'all are drinking every night and fighting, that is unhealthy. So the first thing that I say is y'all got to stop drinking, because this shit is crazy. But yes, other than that, yes, you are right. Obviously, moderation and all things, etc. That's like a Greek philosophy quote that I don't know, moderation. Anyway, all right. So this has been super fun. Obviously, this is longer than all of my other episodes, just so we could hang out. And I forgot to mention that you have a podcast, which is my adopted podcast, because I am the one who encouraged you, like how you encouraged me to go on Substack. I encourage you to make this podcast because obviously, like me, you could just talk without any cues. In case anybody thinks we planned any of this, we didn't. I mean, that could have been obvious, at least on my end. I've been just mainlining coffee to stay awake in the afternoon.
We're on the same page with that.
Just freewheeling this. But yeah, your podcast is
it's Eating Disorder Recovery Chat, and it's on Spotify. And if people want to reach out to work with me or a member of my team, you can reach out at www.theeatingdisordercenter.com.
Great. And of course, I will have all those links, which I'll ask you right after we finish recording. And thank you so much. This was a pleasant experience. Perhaps I'll even have other guests after such a pleasant experience.
No, you're such a good interviewer, but we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, but nobody should bet the farm on that one, because I do, you know, I am very picky in who I will hang out and talk to for free. Although if you want to be my client, which is not free, you can always email me at samantha@psychmom.com. And of course, all of my other links are always around. And I'm going to press stop now. So bye, Jen, but you stay here.
Bye. Thank you.
ABC Wednesday, Shifting Gears is back.
He has arisen.
Tim Allen and Kat Dennings return in television's #1 new comedy.
What?
With a star-studded premiere including Jenna Elfman, Nancy Travis, and...
Hey, buddy!
A big home improvement reunion.
Welcome.
Oh, boy.
That guy's a tool.
Shifting Gears, season premiere Wednesday, 8/7 Central on ABC, and stream on Hulu.